The Colorado sun didn't just shine, it attacked. It beat down on the earth like a blacksmith's hammer, turning green fields into a graveyard of yellowed grass that screamed with every step. The summer of 1882 was a mean one, a cruel one. It felt like the sky itself had forgotten how to cry. Ethan Callaway stood like a statue carved from grief. He was staring at a simple grave, a modest headstone that had been punished by 2 years of sun and snow. But the name was still clear. Joseph Callaway, 1867-1880. 2 years. 2 years to the day since his boy had coughed up his last breath, stolen by the same consumption that had taken so many others. Ethan's hands, calloused and cracked from a lifetime of fighting the land, placed a single wildflower on the dirt. Next to it, he set down a small harmonica. It was the last thing he'd ever given Joseph, before the boy's lungs got too weak to play. The little brass instrument caught the light and threw a flash of gold across the name carved in stone. "I miss you, Joseph," he whispered. His voice was a raw thing, full of rocks and rust, an emotion he hadn't let out in 2 long years. Not really. The cemetery was on a small hill, looking down over the valley where Ethan's farm was slowly dying, just like the man who owned it. He did just enough work to keep the place from falling down around him, just enough to keep himself from falling down with it. When he finally turned to leave, his tall frame cast a shadow that stretched out long and thin, like a finger pointing back to the grave. He walked back to his horse with the invisible weight of 2 years pressing down on his shoulders, a weight that never, ever got any lighter. The ride home was quiet, just the thud of hooves and the lonely cry of a hawk circling in the big empty sky. But as the farm came into view, something was wrong. There was a wagon parked by his front porch. 2 people were standing beside it, waiting. Ethan's whole body went tight. Visitors were like rain in that cruel summer. They just didn't happen. The folks in town had learned to leave Ethan Callaway to his ghosts. They'd gotten tired of his short answers and the unwelcoming wall he'd built around himself. As he got closer, he recognized the bigger man. It was Reverend Gabriel Wilson. He wasn't just a preacher. He was a man who'd known Ethan in another life, a life before the farm and the silence. They'd served together in the war. Gabriel a chaplain and Ethan a field surgeon, Dr. Ethan Callaway, a man whose hands had pulled soldiers back from the edge of death on blood-soaked battlefields. The second person was just a boy, no more than 11 or 12 years old, as thin as a fence rail, swimming in clothes that were 2 sizes too big. Ethan's jaw clamped shut. He knew why they were here. Gabriel had tried this before. He was always trying to fill the hole in Ethan's life with strays and orphans, as if you could patch a man's soul with other people's sorrow. "Ethan!" Gabriel called out, his voice full of a warmth that Ethan's had lost long ago. "It's good to see you, old friend." Ethan swung down from his horse without a word, tying the reins to the post. He gave Gabriel a short, sharp nod, but he wouldn't look at the boy. Not yet. "What do you want, Gabriel?" His tone was cold. It made it clear this wasn't a friendly visit. Gabriel just smiled, a sad kind of smile. "This is Nathan," he said, putting a hand on the boy's bony shoulder. "He's been at the Denver orphanage for about 8 months now." This time Ethan had to look. The boy, Nathan, had sandy brown hair that fell into his eyes. And those eyes, they were too old. They'd seen too much. The kid met Ethan's gaze for a split second, then looked down at the dusty ground. "And?" Ethan prompted, already turning his back on them and walking toward his front door. Gabriel followed him, pulling the boy along. "He needs a place to stay, Ethan. Just for a few weeks." Ethan stopped on his porch steps and turned around, his face a mask of irritation. "I'm not running a boarding house, Gabriel. You know that. I can't help you." But then he saw the look on the boy's face. It wasn't hurt. It was something worse. It was resignation. It was the face of a kid who had been rejected so many times he didn't even expect anything else. It stirred something deep in Ethan's chest, something uncomfortable and sharp. "Perhaps we could discuss this inside," Gabriel said, his voice gentle but firm. Reluctantly, Ethan pushed open the door and stepped into the cool, dusty air of the farmhouse. The main room was a kitchen and a living space all in one. A stone fireplace stood cold against one wall. A doorway led to the bedrooms. And against the far wall, Covered in a thin layer of dust was an upright piano. The boy's eyes snapped to it immediately. A flicker of something, interest, longing, crossed his face before he shut it down again. The boy can wait outside, Ethan grunted, but Gabriel was already leading Nathan to a chair. Sit here for a moment, Nathan. Then Gabriel took Ethan by the elbow and pulled him to the far corner of the room. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper. The boy is dying, Ethan. The words just hung there in the dusty air. They were heavy. They were sharp. What? Ethan's eyes shot over to Nathan, who was sitting perfectly still at the table, his hands folded in his lap. He has a tumor on his back, Gabriel said, his voice thick with sorrow. It's growing. The doctor at the orphanage. He says Nathan has maybe 2 or 3 months left. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, spread through Ethan's chest. It was the same cold he'd felt watching Joseph fade away. And you brought him here? Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but it was shaking with a rage he hadn't felt in years. You brought a dying child to me, because you know I couldn't save my own son? You want me to watch it happen all over again? Gabriel's face softened. No, Ethan. I brought him to you because you both need healing. I don't need... You do. Gabriel cut him off, a rare hardness in his voice. Look at this place. Look at yourself. You're a ghost, haunting your own life. It's been 2 years, Ethan. Joseph wouldn't want this for you. The name hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had to turn away. He couldn't look at Gabriel. The boy has no one, Gabriel pressed on. The families who might have taken him in, they lose interest when they learn he's sick. No one wants to open their heart to a child they know they're going to lose. Ethan let out a bitter, broken laugh. And you think I do? I think, Gabriel said, his hand landing on Ethan's shoulder, that you, more than anyone, understand what he's going through. Ethan risked another glance at the boy. Nathan was just sitting there, patient, so patient. It was the patience of a child who had spent too much of his life waiting in doctors' offices. He had a strange kind of dignity, even in his worn-out clothes. Just a few days, Ethan, Gabriel pleaded. That's all I'm asking, while I find another place. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. He felt trapped. If he said no, the boy would go back to that orphanage to die surrounded by strangers. And even in the depths of his own grief, Ethan couldn't be that cruel. A few days, he finally bit out. That's all. Relief flooded Gabriel's face. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you. He can stay in the spare room, Ethan grunted, already regretting it. Not, he stopped himself. Not Joseph's room. Gabriel just nodded. He understood. He called the boy over, and Nathan stood, clutching a small canvas bag that held everything he owned in the world. Thank you, sir, he said to Ethan, his voice quiet but clear. Gabriel gave the boy a quick hug, whispered something in his ear, and then he was gone. The sound of his wagon faded, leaving a silence in the house that was louder than any noise. Ethan and Nathan stood there, two strangers thrown together by fate, with no idea what to do next. I'll show you to your room, Ethan finally said, and walked away, not even checking to see if the boy was following. The first evening was a masterclass in awkward silence. Ethan made beans and cornbread, slapping a plate down in front of Nathan without a word. The boy ate like a bird, taking tiny, careful bites, as if even chewing took too much energy. Is it all right? Ethan heard himself ask, and was surprised by the question. Nathan looked up, startled. Yes, sir. It's very good. Thank you. Then silence again. After the meal, Nathan insisted on helping with the dishes. Ethan watched him move. He was careful, but every now and then he'd shift his weight, a subtle movement to ease some hidden pain in his back. When the kitchen was clean, Nathan just stood in the middle of the room, lost. You can read if you want, Ethan said, pointing to a small shelf of books. Or just do as you please. The boy's face lit up. He went to the shelf, his fingers trailing over the spines of the books like they were sacred objects. He pulled one out. A book on natural history. It had been Joseph's favorite. Ethan felt a sharp pang in his chest as he watched Nathan settle into a chair with the same book his son had loved. As the sun went down, Ethan lit the lamps and pretended to be busy, trying not to stare at the boy reading so intently in the corner. The kid seemed to know when it was time for bed. He closed the book, placed it back exactly where he'd found it, and stood up. "Good night, Mr. Calloway," he said softly. "Thank you again." Ethan just nodded. He couldn't trust his voice. He listened to the boy's soft footsteps go down the hall, the gentle click of a door closing. Only then did he let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He sank into his chair, exhausted. This was a mistake. Having this boy here, this dying boy who moved with the same careful deliberation that Joseph had in his last months. It was like living through it all over again. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Ethan lay in the dark, listening to the old house groan and settle, the howl of a coyote, the whisper of the wind. But there was a new sound now. It was faint, but it was there. It was the sound of Nathan, tossing and turning in the spare room, trying to find a position that didn't hurt, trying to get comfortable around the tumor that was slowly, relentlessly killing him. Just a few days, Ethan told himself. Just a few days. The next morning, Ethan was up before the sun, but Nathan was already awake. He was standing at the kitchen window, just watching the sky turn from gray to pink. "Good morning, sir," the boy said. "I hope I'm not in the way." "No," Ethan said. "You been up long?" Nathan shook his head. "Just a little while. I like watching the sun come up." He said it like each sunrise was a gift, the kind of gift you only appreciate when you know you don't have many left. After a quiet breakfast, Ethan told Nathan he had chores to do. "You can stay here and rest." But the boy shook his head. "I'd like to help, sir, if I may. I'm stronger than I look." Ethan doubted it, but he didn't have the heart to say no. They started with the chickens, and Ethan was surprised. The kid knew his way around a farm. He worked hard with a quiet determination. But then they moved to the well. They had to carry water to the horse trough. Nathan insisted on taking a bucket, a smaller one. But still, they were halfway to the trough when the boy suddenly gasped. The bucket fell from his hand, water splashing in the dust as he doubled over, clutching his back. Ethan was at his side in a second, the doctor in him waking up from a 2-year sleep. "Nathan, what is it? Where does it hurt?" The boy couldn't speak. He was just gritting his teeth against the pain. "I'm sorry," he finally choked out. "I dropped the water." "Forget the water," Ethan said, gently helping the boy stand. "Let's get you inside." He had to half carry him back to the house, the boy's small body trembling. Inside, Ethan sat him in a chair. "Let me see your back," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Nathan turned and let Ethan lift his shirt. And what Ethan saw made his breath catch in his throat. It was a large, angry swelling on the right side of his lower back. The skin was stretched tight and red. Ethan's trained fingers gently probed the area. Nathan flinched but didn't cry out. "How long has it been like this?" Ethan asked, his voice softer now. "A few months," Nathan said. "It's gotten bigger recently." Ethan lowered the boy's shirt. "And the pain?" Nathan hesitated. "Most days, but not usually this bad. I think I lifted the bucket wrong." Ethan knelt down in front of him. He looked into the boy's eyes and he didn't see fear. He saw that same awful resignation, the look of someone trying so hard not to be a burden. It was the exact same look Joseph had worn. That night, after Nathan was in bed, Ethan sat in the main room with a glass of whiskey. He didn't drink much anymore. But tonight he needed it. The house was quiet, too quiet. His eyes drifted to the piano, Joseph's piano. It had been a gift for his 10th birthday. The boy had taught himself to play. After Joseph died, Ethan couldn't bring himself to sell it, but he couldn't bear to hear it played either. It was just a monument to his failure. A soft sound from down the hall broke the silence. A muffled cough. Ethan found himself walking toward Nathan's room. The door was ajar. A small oil lamp was still burning on the bedside table. He crept in to blow it out. As he reached for the lamp, he saw the boy's canvas bag on the floor. It had fallen open. Inside was a small wooden box in a folded piece of paper. He shouldn't look. He knew he shouldn't, but he had to. The box was full of pills, pain pills. The paper was a letter. It was from a Dr. Howard Jenkins at the Denver orphanage. Ethan unfolded it. It was cold, clinical. It described Nathan's condition. A malignant tumor, inoperable, pressing on his spine, a terminal prognosis. 2 to 3 months left. Palliative care only. Ethan folded the letter, his hands shaking, and put it back. He looked at the sleeping boy, so small, so fragile. As he turned to leave, his foot nudged something under the bed. It was a sketchbook. Curiosity got the better of him. He pulled it out and opened it, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The book was filled with drawings, detailed, skillful drawings of his farm, the house, the barn, the old oak tree by the fence line. It was all there. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The drawings were accurate, too accurate. They showed details that could only be seen by someone who had been here, walked this land. Yet the dates in the corner of the pages, they went back months. Months before Gabriel ever brought the boy here. It was impossible. It was like Nathan had seen this place in a dream. It was like he knew he was coming here all along. Ethan shoved the sketchbook back under the bed, blew out the lamp, and fled the room, his heart pounding in his chest. Back in the main room, he poured another whiskey. What was going on? How could that boy have drawn his farm with such detail before he'd ever set foot on it? It made no sense. And as he tried to wrap his mind around the impossible, he heard another sound from down the hall, a quiet whimper of pain. And before he even knew what he was doing, Ethan was on his feet, heading back to the boy's room with a glass of water, his mind reeling from a mystery that was deeper and darker than he could have ever imagined. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm, chores in the morning, rest in the afternoon heat. Nathan was quiet, but he was always watching, always observing. Ethan would find him sketching in his book, his small face a mask of concentration. Ethan tried not to think about the impossible drawings, tried to tell himself there was a logical explanation, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. On the fourth evening, they were sitting on the porch as the sun bled across the sky. "Mr. Calloway," Nathan said, his voice soft, "the piano inside, does anyone play it?" The question hit Ethan like a physical blow. "No," he said, his voice rough. "Not anymore." The boy seemed to sense the pain. "It's a beautiful instrument," he said carefully. "I've always wanted to learn." Ethan looked at the kid, at the longing in his eyes. He should have said no. He should have kept that part of his life locked away, but he couldn't. "You can try it if you like," he heard himself say. Nathan's face lit up. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Wouldn't have offered if I did," Ethan grumbled. They went inside. Nathan approached the piano like it was a holy altar. He lifted the cover, his thin fingers hovering over the yellowed keys. He pressed one. A single clear note rang out in the silent house. Then another, and another. Ethan stood frozen. He was seeing a ghost. He was seeing Joseph, sitting at that same bench, his small hands dancing across the keys, filling the house with life. The pain was sharp, but under it, there was something else, a strange comfort. Nathan had no idea how to play, that was obvious. He was just experimenting. But then he started to pick out a simple melody, something that tickled the edges of Ethan's memory. "Where did you learn that?" Ethan asked. Nathan looked up, a strange look on his face. "I'm not sure," he said. It just came to me, like I've heard it before." The answer sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. That melody. It was the start of a song Joseph had been writing, a song he never got to finish. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The impossible drawings, the impossible melody. It was all swirling in his head. What did it mean? He found himself back in Nathan's room, the boy fast asleep. The sketchbook was under the bed. This time Ethan took it. He sat in the main room, the whiskey bottle on the table, and went through the sketchbook page by page. The drawings of the farm were still there, but as he looked closer, he saw things that made his skin crawl. One drawing showed the big oak tree by the fence line, but in the drawing a huge branch was broken, lying on the ground. Ethan had just fixed that fence last week after a windstorm knocked that very branch down. The drawing was dated 2 months ago. He flipped the page. A drawing of the barn door hanging off one hinge. That had happened last month when his old horse kicked it. The drawing was dated 3 months ago. Page after page, it was the same thing. Small details of things that had happened on the farm, all drawn weeks or months before they actually occurred. The boy wasn't just drawing the farm, he was drawing its future. Ethan's hands were shaking. This wasn't just strange, this was terrifying. He flipped to the back of the book. The last few pages weren't drawings. They were filled with scribbled notes. They looked like nonsense. Random letters and numbers, a child's game. But then he saw it, a series of numbers, and next to them, a crude drawing of the piano. He stared at the numbers. They meant nothing to him. He was about to close the book when he remembered something. Joseph had a game he used to play, a simple code where numbers corresponded to letters of the alphabet. One was A, two was B, and so on. His heart pounding, Ethan grabbed a piece of paper and started to translate the numbers from the sketchbook. 8, 9, 4, 4, 5, 14. He worked slowly. H, I, D, D, E, N. Hidden. The next set of numbers. 9, 14, 19, 9, 4, 5, I, N, S, I, D, E. Hidden inside. What was hidden inside the piano? Ethan walked over to the old instrument, his blood running cold. He ran his hands over the wood, feeling for anything unusual. A loose panel, a hidden switch. Nothing. He sat down on the bench, his mind racing. This was crazy. It had to be a coincidence. But then his fingers brushed against the underside of the keyboard, and he felt it. A small, almost invisible latch. He flicked it. A section of the front panel popped open with a soft click, revealing a hidden compartment. And inside was a small, leather-bound diary, Joseph's diary. Ethan's hands trembled as he lifted the diary out. He had never seen it before. He had never known it existed. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was his son's, but the words he read made the hair on his arms stand up. The first entry was dated a few months before Joseph got sick. I met a new friend today, it read. He comes to me in my dreams. He lives on a farm, just like ours, but different. He's teaching me a song. Ethan flipped through the pages, his heart hammering against his ribs. Joseph wrote about this dream friend often. A boy his own age with sandy brown hair, a boy named Nathan. Ethan felt like he was going to be sick. This wasn't possible. Joseph had died 2 years ago. How could he have known about Nathan? How could he have written about him in a secret diary? He kept reading, desperate for answers. Joseph described the song his dream friend was teaching him. He wrote down the melody, the same simple tune Nathan had picked out on the piano just hours ago. But the later entries grew darker. Joseph wrote about his friend showing him something he found by the creek, a glowing rock. He told me not to touch it, Joseph wrote. He said it made his own father sick, but it was so beautiful. I only held it for a minute. A week after that entry, Joseph started coughing. The doctors called it consumption. But as Ethan read his son's words, a new terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. Joseph described the sickness, not just the cough, but a strange coldness spreading through his bones. A heavy feeling in his back, the same place Nathan had his tumor. What if it wasn't consumption? What if Joseph hadn't been sick? What if he had been poisoned by a rock he found by the creek? A rock that a boy in his dreams, a boy named Nathan, had warned him not to touch. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of violent coughing. He bolted from his chair, the empty whiskey bottle and Joseph's diary still on the table, and ran to Nathan's room. The boy was doubled over in bed, his face pale and slick with sweat. The coughing spell was brutal, shaking his entire small frame. When it finally passed, Nathan looked up at him, his eyes full of apology. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. But Ethan wasn't looking at his face. He was looking at the boy's hand. He had covered his mouth when he coughed, and now on his palm was a smear of blood. The sight sent a jolt of pure, cold terror through Ethan. It was happening again. The blood. It was the beginning of the end. It was the same sign he'd seen with Joseph. But this time was different. This time, he had Joseph's diary. This time, he had the impossible sketchbook. This time, he wasn't just a grieving father. He was a doctor with a terrible, unbelievable clue. "Nathan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm riding into town to see a doctor, an old friend. I think he can help. He didn't wait for an answer. He left the boy with a glass of water and a promise to be back soon. He saddled his horse with a desperate urgency, his mind racing. He had to talk to Samuel Fletcher, the young doctor he had trained on the battlefields of the war. Samuel would think he was crazy, but he had to try. The ride to town was a blur. The whole way, Ethan's mind was a storm of questions. Was it possible? Could two boys separated by years and miles have dreamed of each other? Could a rock from a creek have killed his son? And if it did, what in God's name was growing on Nathan's back? Dr. Samuel Fletcher's office was a small, neat building on the town's main street. When Samuel opened the door, his face was a mixture of surprise and concern. Dr. Calloway, he said, using the title Ethan had left behind in the mud and blood of the war. Come in. What's wrong? Ethan stepped inside, the familiar smell of antiseptic and old books hitting him like a memory. He didn't waste time. He told Samuel everything. The boy, the tumor, the sketchbook that told the future, the secret diary, the glowing rock. He watched Samuel's face as he spoke, expecting to see disbelief, pity, maybe even fear. But Samuel just listened, his intelligent eyes never leaving Ethan's. When Ethan was finished, the room was silent. Samuel took off his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. It was a habit he had when he was thinking hard. Ethan, he said slowly, it's a lot to take in. The dreams, the diary. I can't explain any of that. But the medical side of this, it's troubling. It wasn't consumption, was it? Ethan asked, his voice raw. Joseph, it was something else. Samuel put his glasses back on. From what you're describing, Joseph's symptoms, and now this boy's, it doesn't sound like any form of consumption I've ever seen. And a tumor like the one you describe on Nathan, for it to grow so fast. He trailed off, looking at the anatomical charts on his wall, as if the answer might be hidden there. You said Joseph wrote about a glowing rock, Samuel said. Did he say where he found it? By the creek on my property, Ethan said. Nathan warned him not to touch it. He said it made his father sick. His father? Samuel frowned. But the boy's an orphan. That's what Gabriel said, Ethan replied, a new layer of mystery unfolding. But in the diary, Joseph says Nathan told him about his father, a man who got sick from the same rock. We need to examine the boy, Ethan, Samuel said, his voice now filled with a new urgency. And we need to find that rock. But Ethan's mind was stuck on something else. Gabriel. The Reverend had brought Nathan to him. He had said it was because they both needed healing. But was that the whole truth? How did he choose Nathan out of all the orphans in Denver? Did he know? Did he know about the connection to Joseph? I need to see Gabriel, Ethan said. But first, I need to go back to the farm. I need to look at that sketchbook again. He thanked Samuel, promising to bring Nathan into town as soon as he could, and rode out, leaving the young doctor standing in his office, looking more troubled than Ethan had ever seen him. Back at the farm, Ethan went straight to Nathan's room. The boy was asleep, his breathing shallow. The sketchbook was still under the bed. Ethan grabbed it and flipped to the back pages, to the scribbled notes. He'd been so focused on the piano code, he hadn't paid attention to the other drawings on the page. Now he saw it. Next to a long string of numbers was a crude, hand-drawn map. It showed the creek that ran through his property, and on the map there was a small X marked on a bend in the water near a cluster of 3 birch trees. It had to be the place where Joseph found the rock. He had to go. Now. He checked on Nathan one more time, then headed out, the sketchbook clutched in his hand. He followed the creek, his boots sinking into the soft mud at the water's edge. He found the 3 birch trees easily. They stood exactly where the map showed them, and there, at the bend in the creek, half buried in the silt, was a rock. It wasn't glowing, not in the bright afternoon sun. It was dark, almost black, with strange greenish veins running through it. It was about the size of a man's fist. As Ethan reached for it, he felt a strange warmth radiating from its surface. It was an unnatural heat, a living heat. He wrapped it carefully in a spare cloth from his saddlebag and rode back to the house. his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and triumph. He had it. He had the thing that killed his son. When he got back to the house, he found Nathan awake. The boy was sitting up in bed trying to draw in his sketchbook, but his hands were trembling too much. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice weak, "I had another dream." "What was it, son?" Ethan asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It was about Reverend Wilson," Nathan said, his old man eyes troubled. "He was in a big, dark room, a library. He was reading a letter from my mother." Ethan's blood ran cold. "What did the letter say, Nathan?" The boy shook his head. "I couldn't see the words, but the Reverend," he looked sad and scared. A letter from Nathan's mother. The boy had told him his mother was dead. But what if she had written to Gabriel before she died? What if she had told him about her son's strange dreams, about a boy named Joseph and a farm in Colorado? The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture that was more sinister than Ethan could have imagined. Gabriel hadn't just brought him a random orphan. He had sought Nathan out. He knew there was a connection. But why? Why bring this dying boy to him? What was the Reverend's real game? And as Ethan looked at the sick child in the bed and thought about the warm, strange rock hidden in his saddlebag, he knew one thing for sure. This was no longer just about grief and healing. This was about a secret that had already killed one boy and was now coming for another. Ethan knew he couldn't wait for Gabriel to come to him. He had to go to the source. He had to go to the orphanage. He left Nathan in the care of Martha Simmons, the kind widow from the next farm over, telling her only that it was a medical emergency. He took the strange rock, still wrapped in cloth, and Joseph's diary. The drive to Denver was long and dusty, giving him too much time to think. Was he chasing a ghost? Was he a grieving father who had finally lost his mind? But every time he doubted himself, he thought of the sketchbook, the drawings that came true, the impossible map. He wasn't crazy. Something was terribly wrong. The Denver orphanage was a grim, gray stone building that looked more like a prison than a home for children. Ethan walked in, his face set like granite, and asked to see the man in charge, Dr. Howard Jenkins, the same man who had signed Nathan's letter. Dr. Jenkins was a small, nervous man with watery eyes behind thick spectacles. When Ethan introduced himself and said he was Nathan's current guardian, the doctor's face went pale. Has his condition worsened?" he asked, wringing his hands. "His condition," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low, "is what I'm here to talk about." Ethan placed the wrapped rock on the doctor's desk. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" he asked. Dr. Jenkins stared at it. It's just a rock." "Unwrap it," Ethan commanded. Reluctantly, the doctor did. As his fingers touched the stone, he flinched. "It's warm." "Yes," Ethan said. "It is. My son Joseph found a rock just like this on my property 2 years ago. A week later, he started coughing. You doctors called it consumption. He was dead within 6 months." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Nathan has a tumor on his back. He's coughing blood. You gave him 2 or 3 months. I think you're wrong. I think he's being poisoned, just like my son was." Dr. Jenkins looked like he was about to faint. "Poisoned? By a rock? That's preposterous." "Is it?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes boring into the doctor's. "Tell me about the other children, doctor. The ones who have gotten sick here. How many have had tumors? How many have been diagnosed with aggressive consumption?" The doctor started to stammer, to deny it. But Ethan could see the truth in his terrified eyes. He knew. He knew something was wrong. "Where did this land come from?" Ethan pressed. "This orphanage. Who owned it before?" Dr. Jenkins finally broke. It was donated," he whispered, "by the Blackwood Mining Company. They shut down their local operations years ago. They gave the land to the church as a charitable act." Blackwood Mining. The name was vaguely familiar. They'd been known for experimenting, for looking for rare and exotic minerals. "What were they mining here, doctor?" Ethan demanded. I don't know," Jenkins whimpered. "They said the mine was tapped out." "I think they were lying," Ethan said, standing up. "I think they left something behind. Something in the ground. Something in the water." He pointed a shaking finger at the doctor. You're going to give me the records of every sick child who has been in this orphanage for the past 10 years, and then you're going to show me your well. The records told a horrifying story. Child after child, diagnosed with rare cancers, aggressive tumors, untreatable lung diseases. The mortality rate was staggering, far too high for a place like this. And the symptoms, described in dry, clinical detail, were eerily similar. A strange heaviness, unexplained growths, a rapid decline. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't a curse. This wasn't a tragic coincidence. This was a cluster. This was a pattern. He and Dr. Jenkins went out to the old well in the courtyard. It was a deep, stone well that provided all the water for the orphanage, for drinking, for cooking, for bathing. Ethan stared down into the darkness, a sickening certainty growing in the pit of his stomach. It's in the water, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Whatever this is, they're all drinking it. He took a sample of the water and a sample from the rock and brought them to the geology department at the university in Denver. The professor, a crusty old man with a wild beard, was skeptical at first. But when he analyzed the samples, his face changed. He looked at Ethan with a new, sober respect. What you have here, Mr. Calloway, he said, is not on any standard geological chart. The rock is a form of pitchblende, but it's been altered by intense geothermal pressure. It's highly, well, the term we would use is active. It emits a form of energy we're only just beginning to understand. And the water from your well, it's full of microscopic particles of it. Energy? Ethan asked. What kind of energy? An energy that disrupts living cells, the professor said grimly. It causes them to mutate, to grow uncontrollably. In layman's terms, Mr. Calloway, it's like planting a seed of cancer inside the body. Ethan finally had his answer. It wasn't a tumor on Nathan's back. It was a growth, a mutation caused by drinking poison water his whole life at the orphanage. And Joseph, his son hadn't died from consumption. He had died from radiation poisoning, from holding a cursed rock for just a few minutes. The dreams, the connection between the boys. It wasn't supernatural. It was a warning. Nathan's body, already saturated with the poison, had somehow sensed the same energy in Joseph. It was a connection born of shared trauma, a silent scream across time from one dying boy to another. But there was still one piece of the puzzle missing. Reverend Gabriel Wilson. Ethan found him at the main Denver church, in a large shadowed library, just as Nathan had seen in his dream. Gabriel looked up as Ethan entered, and his face was a portrait of guilt. Ethan, he said, I was just about to send for you. Save it, Ethan said, his voice cold as a grave. I know, Gabriel. I know everything. He told the Reverend what he had discovered. The poisoned well, the mining company, the dying children. Gabriel just sat there, his head in his hands. I didn't know, he finally whispered. Not for sure. I only suspected. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a worn, tear-stained letter. This is from Nathan's mother, he said. She wrote to me a week before she died. She had worked as a laundress at the orphanage. She wrote that she was sick and that many of the children were sick with the same strange illness. She believed the place was cursed. She begged me to get her son out of there. He pushed the letter across the desk. And she wrote about his dreams, about a boy named Joseph on a farm. She thought it was a vision from God, a sign of a safe place for her son. So you brought him to me, Ethan said, the pieces finally slotting together. You knew he was dying, and you knew about his connection to Joseph. You used him. You used my son's memory. No, Gabriel insisted, his eyes pleading. I thought it was a miracle, Ethan. I thought if anyone could understand, if anyone could help him, it was you. I didn't know about the water, I swear it. I just knew something was wrong at that orphanage. And I was trying to save one child. I was trying to answer a dying mother's prayer. Ethan looked at the letter, then at the broken man in front of him. He didn't see a villain. He saw a man who had tried to do the right thing, but had been caught in a web of secrets and lies far bigger than he was. The real villain wasn't Gabriel. It was the Blackwood Mining Company. They had known. They had known the land was poisoned, and they had covered it up. They had donated it to the church, a charitable act to hide a monstrous crime. They had sentenced dozens of innocent children to a slow, painful death, just to protect their profits. Justice. The word echoed in Ethan's soul. He couldn't save his son. He knew with a terrible certainty that it was too late to save Nathan. But he could get justice. He could expose Blackwood Mining. He could save the other children who were still drinking that poisoned water. The grief that had frozen his heart for 2 years finally broke, and in its place a fire began to burn, a righteous fury. He picked up the letter from Nathan's mother. He had the professor's report. He had Joseph's diary. He had the truth. "This isn't over, Gabriel," he said, his voice filled with a purpose he hadn't felt since the war. "This is just the beginning." He walked out of that library not as a grieving father, but as a warrior, ready to fight one last battle for the son he had lost and the son he was about to. Ethan returned to the farm a changed man. The fog of grief had been replaced by the clear, cold light of purpose. He found Nathan weaker than when he had left. The boy was lying in bed, his breathing shallow, but his eyes lit up when he saw Ethan enter the room. "You were gone a long time," Nathan whispered. "I was finding answers," Ethan said, sitting beside him. He took the boy's small, frail hand in his own. "Nathan, I know what's making you sick. It's not a tumor. It's the water at the orphanage. It's poisoned." He explained everything, as gently as he could. The mining company, the rock. He even told him about Joseph, how he had died from the same sickness. Nathan listened, his expression solemn. He didn't seem surprised. It was as if, on some level, he had known all along. "So the dreams were real," he said. "Joseph was trying to warn me. I think he was trying to warn us both," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you, Nathan, you were the messenger. You brought me the truth." In the days that followed, the farm became a headquarters for a quiet war. Samuel Fletcher came out every day, not just to care for Nathan, but to help Ethan and Gabriel plan their attack. They wrote letters to newspapers, to politicians, to lawyers. They compiled all the evidence, the orphanage records, the professor's geological report, Joseph's diary, the letter from Nathan's mother. It was an undeniable mountain of proof. But Nathan was fading. The poison had too strong a hold. The periods when he was awake and lucid grew shorter. Ethan treasured every moment. He would read to him from Joseph's old books. They would talk about the farm, about the stars. One evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Nathan turned to him. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm not scared anymore." "Of dying?" Ethan asked, his heart aching. Nathan nodded. "I used to be, at the orphanage. I was scared I would die alone. But I'm not alone now." He looked up at Ethan, his eyes clear and full of a love that was almost too painful to see. "Could I, for the time I have left, could I call you Dad?" The question broke through the last of Ethan's defenses. Tears streamed down his face as he pulled the boy into a gentle hug. "I would be honored, Nathan," he whispered. "I would be honored to be your dad." A few days later, Nathan passed away in his sleep. He died peacefully, holding Ethan's hand. He was buried on the small hill next to Joseph. The whole town came to the funeral. They had all heard the story by then, the story of the poison well and the company that had tried to cover it up. They came not just to mourn a boy they had never met, but to stand with the man who was fighting for him. After the funeral, the war against Blackwood Mining began in earnest. The newspapers published the story. There was a public outcry. The company tried to deny it, to dismiss Ethan as a hysterical, grieving father. But the evidence was too strong. The government was forced to launch an investigation. The orphanage was shut down, and the remaining children were moved to a safe location. The well was sealed forever. The legal battle took almost a year, but in the end, Ethan won. Blackwood Mining was found guilty of negligence and a massive cover-up. They were forced to pay a huge settlement, which was used to create a trust fund for the surviving children of the orphanage, and to build a new modern hospital in Denver, specializing in treating the very cancers their poison had caused. Ethan Calloway became a hero, but he didn't care about that. He had gotten justice for his sons, both of them. He reopened his old medical practice on the farm, turning his home into a special clinic for the children who had been poisoned. He dedicated the rest of his life to healing them, to giving them the future that had been stolen from Joseph and Nathan. Years later, an old Ethan Calloway would sit on his porch, watching a new generation of children playing in the yard, children he had helped save. He would look up at the hill where two small headstones stood side by side, and he would think about the impossible boy who had come to him in his darkest hour. A boy who had crossed the veil of death itself to deliver a message, to uncover a terrible secret, and to teach a broken man how to live again. The story of Ethan and Nathan is a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the greatest purpose, and that a father's love, once ignited, can be strong enough to change the world. If you were moved by this story of justice and redemption, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. You won't want to miss the incredible stories we have coming up next.